Hello, this is Ken Ferrie with this week's Boots in the Field report. This was a very busy week on all fronts. Saturday we planted our last corn plot up in Livingston County. In that trip up and back I saw a lot of planters running, planting corn and beans for the first time, as well as replanting in those heavy rain paths. Seed corn planting was in full swing. Some guys were rotary hoeing, saw some guys spraying, one guy row crop cultivating, and a few guys baling hay. A great day to travel if you wanted to see agriculture in action. A number of customers were spraying cutworm this week. We had to spray 2 of our plots of the double pro corn that had heavy enough cutting, and it was in the areas where we had the heavier winter annuals. The cutworm issue will be something that we'll need to be watching for the next couple of weeks in the high-risk fields until that corn outgrows it. One question this week is, as the organic corn is being planted, will we have to worry about cutworm being that we're planting later? Planting date doesn't change the risk. Cutworm don't have a season. They just blow in here all summer. It's when the corn gets too big that they can't cut it off that we're outside of that risk window. So planting corn now doesn't make it risk-free if it had vegetation out there when the moths were laying their eggs. Now, most organic corn has had several tillage passes already on it to take out those first flushes of weeds. So keeping those fields clean will reduce the risk quite a bit, which is important when you don't have a rescue plan with organic corn. The past week, a number of cornfields are showing flex star and reflex carryover type symptoms from that type of chemistry. That's been my concern ever since we fought through the dry June last year. How will this show up in next year's corn crop? Now, most of that corn should shake it off with time. But my guess is we're probably going to ding those G hybrids, the ones that tend to flex rows around on the ear. Some of the heavy rain event areas, we're seeing residual herbicides dinging soybeans that are trying to get out. Let's watch these fields close and make those replant calls quickly if we need to. This year it's hard to pick out what the sweet spot was to plant corn. Usually by this time of year, we can look back and say that was the week or the days not to plant corn. I'm seeing a lot of good corn stands and a number of excellent corn stands. The number of fields that fall under excellent category, though, are considerably less than they were last year. At this time last year, I had to pinch myself with the massive number of fields that fit into that excellent stand category. In field visits this spring, we'll find those excellent stands in one area, planted at a specific date, then travel a few miles where a 4-inch rain event happened, and the fields planted on the same day are struggling. You know, as we look across the gamut of challenges to this year's stand, establishments such as the cold soils, seed orientation, frost, hard rains, crust, seed quality, herbicide damage, dry seed beds, too deep a corn. I guess I have to say I'm happy with the good stands. But I don't see the same amount of A+ stands as we had last year. The larger corn is transitioning into that ugly corn phase. That's when the seed roots hand off to the true roots. If everything goes as planned, you won't see any hesitation in growth. But if anything has interfered with crown root development, you'll see fields go from uniform in color to ununiform in color and height. The longer the ugly corn period lasts, the more it will affect yield. With warming temperatures, we are now in what we call the carbon penalty. As the soil biology wakes up, it consumes soil nitrates, sulfates, and phosphorus. And this can lock things up and turn plants yellow. How yellow and how long it stays yellow will depend on your carbon load, carbon location. Is it worked in or is it on top? And how did you manage your nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfate applications? As we watch our weekly nitrates here at the campus, we saw a 60-pound drop in nitrates this week without any rain to leach it away and a crop too small to take much of it up. These 60 pounds are temporarily tied up in the decomposition of last year's residue. Now, the carbon penalty will affect all corn sizes. The carbon penalty phase is different than the ugly corn stage. You can have perfect crown roots development and bypass the ugly corn stage, but still get caught in the carbon penalty. This is a good time to evaluate your 4-hour approach to nitrogen and sulfur. If you mastered your 4-hour approach, the corn will roll through this period without slowing down. This is where the timing and placement come into play. Putting nitrogen, sulfur, and phosphorus near the plant to keep it growing while the carbon penalty happens in the soil around it. The longer corn stumbles in the carbon penalty, the bigger effect it'll have on yield, especially on your G and your L1 hybrids. This is a good time to evaluate your fields and maybe the neighboring fields to see how they're faring. The carbon penalty is one thing you can scout from the pickup going down the road. By fall, these symptoms will be long forgotten, and most growers won't correlate yield loss to the event happening right now. Soybeans will be caught in the carbon penalty as well if they're smaller than 4 trifoliates. Beans don't make their own in until after that 4th trifoliate. The nitrogen shortage will cause slow growth, kind of locking up that soybean for the next couple of weeks. Color will be off and the growth will be slow. But this rough patch doesn't seem to affect yield much. In our side-by-side trials where we apply nitrogen to the soybean to keep it out of the carbon penalty stage, while we do produce greener and bigger beans, we don't improve the yield. Matter of fact, we have more plots that got tall and reduced yield than increased it. More areas are starting to fall into that abnormal dry area on the Illinois drought map. In the dry areas, we're seeing the beginning of rootless corn syndrome. Now, you'll see V3 to V5 corn, V6 corn starting to lean in different directions as it gets taller. These plants are still thriving off the seed roots and look healthy, but tend to lean as they become heavier with growth. These plants are not developing crown roots. Crown roots don't develop in the air like brace roots, and they don't develop in dry soil. In the areas the surface soil is so dry that it's stopping these roots from developing. Rootless corn will be worse if you didn't firm the soil above the seed at planting. It can also develop in those fields where we had to rotary hoe to break the crust, letting that surface moisture get away. Now, we had to break the crust to get the corn to emerge, but the aftermath with no rain is going to lead to some rootless corn. The fix for rootless corn is rain to stimulate those crown roots and fire them off. Those of you that have irrigation, be sure to check those crown root development. If it's lacking, fire up that irrigator, even if that corn looks good. For the dryland acres, we need to pray for rain and get these crown roots going. A number of growers have been sending in pictures of dead corn plants scattered throughout their corn stand. Dead plants can come from several things. The important thing is to identify the cause now while you have the evidence. Dead plants can be disease, wireworm, grub, fertilizer burn, non-Roundup corn. Hopefully that's a small percentage. Other than Roundup taking out the non-Roundup plants, the answer to these dead plants will be below ground. So we need to dig these up and take a look. If you want, you can text pictures to us and we can help identify the cause. If we want to move these stands from good to excellent, we need to know how to improve and where to improve. While we're looking at the gamut of issues, wireworm damage is one of them that's at the top. And we will need to change our insecticide program to get ahead of wireworm in the next crop. By the end of this week, we will be at about 450 to 500 insect heat units on armyworm. We should see that feeding around 600. So we might see feeding in the south next week, but most likely the week after. So stay on top of those weed acres. It's time to switch out the lures in our traps from cutworm and armyworm to European corn borer lures. If you don't have any lures, let Jared know and he'll ship them to you. Rootworm hatch is underway. By the end of next week, you should be able to see feeding and larvae in your root digs. It is still pretty early to do a root float to determine the pressure for future planting. Those fields enrolled in the virtual field visit, our technicians will bring root balls out of each field. We'll soak them and do a root wash, and then we'll rate the feeding as well as take pictures. By then, the rootworm will be done feeding and in the process as emerging as beetles. Doing your digs now may still be a little early. You may miss the big push of the rootworm that are still yet to come. With the soft winter, I do expect higher pressures this year. As we get more nitrates in with the side dressing season kicking off, we can see the bigger rain events as a result as the data comes back. The nitrates are lower than I expected, and in the areas of heavier rain events, the second foot is almost equal with the top foot. The good news is the N is still here. It's just in the second foot. The bad news is the corn is only 5 inches tall and fighting the carbon penalty. It could use the N that slipped into that second foot. The corn needs to be in that knee-high to waist-high to feed on that second foot. This is one of those years where the second foot samples keep us from over-applying N. We here at Crop Tech hope everyone will find a chance to slow down and enjoy the holiday weekend. Take some time to stop and acknowledge the ultimate sacrifice so many Americans have made so we can farm in the greatest nation on earth. Because of their sacrifice, we can farm today only worrying about hitting rocks in the field, not landmines like our fellow Ukrainian farmers. Enjoy the weekend, but keep these Americans in your prayers and thoughts. To stay up to date, check out our website at croptechinc.com and subscribe to our podcast, Boots in the Field Report. Keep her safe, keep her moving.